Hello and good afternoon TVI viewers. Welcome to CrossRoads with Neethan Shan. As you know, CrossRoads is a weekly talk show dedicated to discussing a variety of topics that are relevant to a social, economic, political and cultural advancement of Tamil Canadians. Today is International Women's Day. As many of you know, women in Canada still continue to face many challenges and inequities in many fields: education, employment, health, justice, immigration, to name a few. Though all these fields are vital, in order for us to go deep in the episode, we will mainly focus on women's rights as it relates to the field of education. So here with us to discuss the gender equity in education, we have three amazing women leaders in our community. So let me start by introducing each of them to you. Darshika Selvasivam. Darshika works as a youth worker, as an outreach staff with Pathways to Education with YouthLink in Scarborough Village. And Initha Subramaniam. Initha works at YRDSV, York Region District School Board, as a teacher liaison, mainly a role of connecting the community and the schools, parents, teachers and school together with dealing with many issues that students face. And Jessica Thyriar. And Jessica has been, was the first Tamil woman to be elected as the president of a student union in a university for York Federation of Students, and currently pursuing graduate studies. So welcome. Thanks for taking the time to be here. We are going to be talking mostly about education system as it relates to young women and the various inequities that that many of the young women face. Mm-hmm. So let's start with Darshika. You've worked a number of years as an advocate for students and and also has been championing a lot of the gender equity, women's rights issues. So what are pressing issues that young women today in school system face?
With my experience, Neethan, in education, both in the post-secondary sector, but also in the high school sector, I think accessibility of education for young women is definitely the #1 issue. And by that, what I mean is whether it's access to particular programs or opportunities, or even access to education in the way that the cost of education continues to rise and how that affects my racialized immigrant community, such as women in the Tamil community. I think that's very relevant, right? And so I think that this connects into the jobs that women have access to within education, and also the opportunities of leadership that they get access to. In a nutshell, these are some of the issues that I think really affect women.
Yeah. Initha?
I think there's a lot of systemic barriers for our young students that are in our elementary school system as well as secondary school system, in regards to, it could be something simple as course selection, or participating in an after school program, or participating in a day school program. I believe that all of these barriers can prevent them from choosing various paths or fields in their post-secondary. Example, we have something called junior achievement, where one of the activities for grade 7s and 8s was to, we called out various jobs and we asked them to give names to those people. We found out that most of the jobs, the students separated into a male job and a female job based on the name. So if this is what the kids are coming out of elementary school or secondary school thinking, that as a woman I can only do this, then where did the growth comes from? I think the barrier is the fixed mindset of, as a woman I can only go into these subjects, or I should only do these subjects.
And there isn't enough being done in the school system to change that, is it?
Schools are working towards that, example, with various workshops and various conferences, but I think that support needs to also come from home, and especially from media as well, because gender roles, or where the child is going to be in their social location, is already determined by a lot of things as media. Example, the new movie, the Cinderella movie that's coming. What's the message that's been given out to our young people that are going to go and watch in rows with their families, with their mums and dads and guardians, that to be a princess is what you should persevere towards. You need a man to come and rescue you, and you need to dress in a certain way, and you need to dream. That's your dream of having a family and becoming a princess, right? So I know schools are counter narratives, like we are working on the counter narratives, but it's challenging when media portrays, a movie that we recently came out in one of our Tamil, channels. Last weekend was a movie about a woman who's sexually assaulted, but then she seeks out assailant, like the man that raped her, to make him fall in love. And this is a primetime movie that's coming. So, and then she wants to marry him. So in countries like Canada, that's a felony. Rape is a felony. But when we are portraying this to our young people, then what's the counter narrative? It's difficult for schools to, when the kids come and spend the 6 hours, and then when they go home, they're watching this, and their families are not having that conversation that that's wrong, that's a criminal offense. There's some countries that's a corporal punishment. It's we are finding it very challenging in that sense.
So before I go to Jessica to talk a bit about post-secondary, I got a sense that there is a bit of a talk about outside the school from your thing, right? Is the school system, is the curriculum neutral? Is the curriculum one-sided? I'm talking about both soft curriculum and hard curriculum. Is there a ways in which schools are reinforcing gender norms, quote unquote, or a particular disparity? And do you see that happening?
Yeah, definitely, right? I think Initha hit the nail on the head when she was talking about the systemic element of it. So whether we're talking about the hiring of more non-white or white teachers, to put it quite frank, right? Fewer and fewer racialized teachers being able to find jobs or teaching students being able to be hired by the boards is a systemic element of it. The histories that we're being taught, right? When we're thinking of Canada as this kind of forward progressive country, what about the state of Indigenous people and that history? Right? We often read a very colonial history, and you're talking about people who are migrating from countries that have already been colonized, and wars that continue to happen and displace people because of colonization and its impact. And then we're coming to a country where there's this kind of new opportunity that's championed. Oh, this is the land of opportunity. You have so many options here. Education is at its utmost. But then there's a group of people who are the indigenous people of this land who are being marginalized, right? And who are being oppressed and actually eradicated. A genocide is happening, right? And so few of us have access to that information. I think that is the fundamentals of what the education system is based on, right?
So I guess it's not just Eurocentric, but also patriarchal kind of a structure that's male dominant discourse of narratives of history, right?
And we can see that in the way that even the way that the curriculum is structured, in the way that, how many women do we see as English writers, as writers that are championed, right? We talk about maybe, Margaret Atwood once in their school year, but we talk about Macbeth, we're talking about, The Great Gatsby, right, which is read. Students watching right now would be able to resonate. If we look at all the writers, even when I walked into a classroom the other day, there was a poster of writers and literates, they would call it. These are people who are championed in literature in English, right? But even then, when it comes to the British English history, we're talking about predominantly a male-dominated. There was not one woman on that poster to say that women have never contributed to writing. Is very significant. And then racialized women, let alone racialized women, right? How much farther do we have to go, right? And I find that also the systemic element really comes from administration as well. And we have to be critical in the way that the system, not the individual, puts controls and muzzles on folks in order to be able to get powers of opportunity. If you're critical of a space, then you're not going to get the opportunity. So you have guidance counselors, you have, principals, other administrative staff who try not to push the envelope and try to toe the line, right? And that impacts students, predominantly racialized women students who, if they speak out, are being seen as aggressive, right? Are being suspended disproportionately more than their white counterparts, right?
So Jessica, post-secondary education is somewhat connected, but it's totally different realm. And I know many post-secondary education faculty who are racialized women face huge barriers. But let's talk just mostly about students. I know you champion a policy against, in favor of eliminating sexual assaults in York University. And so can you talk us a bit about for the second segment, we'll talk a little bit more on the violence side of things, but let's talk a bit about other challenges that post-secondary women students face.
I think the issue is that the university was made for the rich. And by the rich, it was rich white men. But now we see more women attending these campuses, but it has an androcentric curriculum, right? When we are going to these classes, women's studies or equity studies are the least funded programs. So when we try to be part of these programs, we try to join, it's limited amount of spaces in these classrooms to talk about such important issues. So if you want to talk about racism, you want to talk about sexism, there's only these small classes and these small departments which have racialized professors, but that don't get paid enough. They're contract faculty. They need to be able to do all the work, because if we are doing readings in women's studies, it's about Judith Butler, who's a white woman, right? Or once in a while for Black History Month, we'll learn about Bell Hooks, or we'll learn about another Black, like Harriet Tubman, right? But our heroes aren't in our history books that we learn. So when we, what I find, which is really frustrating, is most writers that we learn about, they are white women. So white women or white men will go into these communities, and I'll take the Aboriginal community, and they will write on it and they will do research on it, and they are considered experts of these communities. But if racialized women, or for example, if I was to do research on my own community, that would be considered biased, right? Because I'm doing research on my own community. So how are outsiders—
Researching your own backyard.
Yeah, but how are outsiders trying to take over our identities and portray themselves while at the same time they're benefiting from this? They're making money off of our culture, and they're wiping our education and our identities away. So for me to be able to talk about my identity is being biased and talking about my experience, but experience is what makes education go forward, right? And you'll see within the classrooms and within universities, it's students that are putting on things about racism. It's students that are putting on efforts about this, with some help from faculty, but these aren't the faculty that have all the money, and these aren't the faculty that can speak out against the university, because they don't have that protection, and they have to do everything carefully. So when we try to do things, when we try to push the envelope a little bit, it's all through student action. That's it.
So it's the knowledge production itself is completely biased, because it's not being produced in an authentic sense from people who are impacted, from racialized women being supported. How about the experiences of students in general? Is the spaces being welcoming spaces? Like, for example, I used to be a math teacher, and math curriculum, for example, if you take a math textbook and look at all the examples, who they are talking about, it's heavily loaded with examples of men and men-related quote-unquote things that is, obviously need to be socially changed,
gendered,
but it's heavily promoting a certain type of attitude towards the thing, right? So in terms of the spaces you go in as a student leader, are the spaces being reformed or changed or transformed to be more inclusive for women, racialized women?
I think student spaces with student activism, they are being reformed to include all identities. Just recently, York University put in X amount of $1 million to have gender equity in our engineering building, and it was a big thing to try to get a balance of men and women in engineering, right? But would this have been the case if the engineering school had existed for 20 years? No. It's like a media tactic to try to get people to be like, wow, I want to go to York, they're for women, right? But they try to do things like that, but when we fight for sexual violence for X amount of years, it takes this long for a policy to come through. It takes the media trying to criticize universities for institutions to do something about it. So unless it benefits the institution, there's no reason for them to do anything about it.
So in overall bigger picture, are there any bigger picture efforts being done to change the curriculum to be anti-oppressive, or the kind of system to be anti-oppressive, from your knowledge? I know the student movement has been leading, and you're from York University, so there are specific examples of it, but there are universities that have even not started thinking about some of the gender equity stuff as well, right? So is there is it left to the principals or the student unions, or is there a broader movement?
I know school boards are working on a culturally responsive, relevant pedagogy. It's like understanding who's in front of you, who are the 30 students in your classroom, and catering towards their, heritages, and making the curriculum, based on that they can see themselves in the heritage. Like when you said math is an area where as young as primary ages that we are seeing where the girls are saying this is not for us. The PISA test results were in 2012 showed that the less participation of young women in math competitions, math teams, and it also shows that there's an anxiety when it comes to problem solving. Even for girls and boys that are working at the same level, the fixed mindset of this is not something I'm good at, even though results prove that their tests or their assignments prove that they are working at the same level or higher, but their concept is, math is just for boys, and I'm not going to go into computers or engineering or physics because that's just too technical for me. And I think when we make the curriculum relevant to them and based on using resources that they can see, hey, this person is somebody that I can relate to, or bringing in people from the community that they can relate to, I think that is when we break that barrier and stop the marginalization of young women, and also opening it up for them to choose career paths that they would have exceeded, but their fear of this is not for me because I'm a woman.
So we're going to take a quick commercial break, but before that, just a quick question, because the second half is going to be talking mostly about violence. Now, there is a tendency in the school board or any system to start talking about multiculturalism or cultural competency and so on, right? There's a real resistance to using an anti-oppressive framework. Would the new frameworks solve anything, or is it just distracting from the real purpose of how we need to transform our communities?
So I think that the reason that it makes people so uncomfortable when we talk about anti-oppression or anti-racism work is because it's talking about power and where power is located. Multiculturalism sends a very illusionary message about everybody having access to power and celebrating our food and clothing and histories equally, but that's not the case. Whereas anti-oppression talks about where is power located and where is power not located, and how do you flip that script, and that makes people very uneasy.
And how did that power get accumulated in some place? The historic disadvantage gets left out.
Talking about that often comes, as Jessica had mentioned earlier, at the post-secondary sector, where students actually get the opportunity to mobilize, right? Because where's the power located? It's located at the trustees, it's located at the administrative level, and even in the guidance office, when what courses get chosen by who, and whose parents are able to advocate, right? We get pushback all the time when we try to advocate for particular students, and the parents have to come in, is what the guidance counselors tell us. But then whose parents are able to come into the office? But then when students try to create a space where they're able to critically mobilize, that space isn't provided. It's minimized down to student activity councils, right? And then who dominates those spaces are people that are on the same page as teachers. As Initha said, in a lot of the teaching area, in a lot of the hiring of teachers, they're not representative of students, right? So this is how power gets manifested, and we see years later that there's very little, change in the education system within the high school sector and even the elementary sector, I'd say.
But also, like the social location. Right?
Exactly.
Even as a racialized teacher that's been hired, how much, if I'm on the spectrum, a different state in the social location, then how much power do I have to voice out when I see, there's adversity or there's marginalization happening, right?
Exactly.
So, with the social location comes your privilege. With the privilege comes your voice, right? So we know where the hierarchy is.
And that conversation isn't happening enough in our system. So let's take a break at this point to have a few minutes of commercial break, and then we'll come back in a few minutes. Welcome back. You're watching CrossRoads with Neethan Shan. Today we are talking about issues and challenges faced by young women in the school system, both secondary, elementary, as well as in the post-secondary realms. So going back into a more serious topic, all the topics are serious, but this is something that both our communities and communities across the globe are struggling with in terms of addressing, finding ways to prevent. I'll start with Jessica, because you've done a lot of work around advocating for violence prevention in York University, and you've advocated for a policy, sexual assault prevention and response policy at York University, and it's going to be a milestone work because it can have ripple effect in other places. So can you take us through some of the things that led to it? What were the issues that were underlying that were that you were trying to address?
So I would say maybe for many years, there have been sexual assaults at York University, and it was all about media attention, right? Like, what is York doing about sexual assaults? But what people didn't understand is it's not a stranger coming out of the dark bushes that's trying to assault women. It's people on our very own campus that attend our campus that are committing sexual assaults. So what we had first done is a group of students had come together with the student union, the sexual assault support line, Center for Women and Trans People, and we had decided that York University should notify our community every time there is a sexual assault. So we won that victory. But as each sexual assault came out and was sent out to the public, the more media came and started scrutinizing York, saying, this is where all the sexual assaults happen. Don't send your kids to York. But the problem with that is this is a school that's reporting that sexual assaults happen. At U of T, they don't report that sexual assaults happen to their student. They deal with it with the Toronto police. So the next thing that we came up with was to have a sexual assault policy. So this was in our METRAC report. It was an audit done by predecessors of the York Federation of Students to fight for an internal audit for safety for women on campus. And that was one of the recommendations that they had. And for 3 years, we continued lobbying the administration. And finally, one meeting, we went with the president. And he was like, okay, we'll do this. So at first I was a bit skeptical because they don't just agree to anything without something underlying, but we were allowed to be part of the process, and a lot of other student groups were as well. And while we were developing this, it's been a process for 2 years. We've done consultations with community members, but what had happened was the Toronto Star did an investigation, 2 reporters, and they found that only 9 out of 78 universities in Canada had sexual assault policies, and no colleges had sexual assault policies. So what then started happening is the Council of Colleges started meeting, the Council of Universities started meeting, they started releasing all this information. Like the Council of Colleges decided they would have a standard sexual assault policy. The universities decided they would have a conference, and they would have a website for students to access how to access resources. But the problem with that is a standard policy is not going to be just a check mark, right? You need to consult your community and what happens there. So when I went to the conference with all the university sectors, something that I pointed out was this isn't just a check mark, you need to consult, because you had students pulling, universities pulling random students in who had no work and didn't want radical students that were concerned about sexual violence to be on these committees. So we finally passed our sexual assault policy at York. It's great, and I'm glad there's a lot of input from students, but now we need to pass protocols, right? Because if a police officer is called every time there's sexual assault is an underreported crime. Not very many people, and I especially know I am not comfortable as a racialized woman speaking to police officers, because there's things like double victimization where there's this messaging on campus which is, well, why were you walking late at night? Or victim what were you wearing? Yeah, very victim blaming, right? And it's not only from people around the campus, it's also the like police officers that respond like this, right? They say that it's part of their research they're conducting, but what you're doing is you're actually telling the person it was their fault for what happened to them. And I think some other issues that are pressing around this is programs and that schools have. When you tell people that, well, if you tell a woman, you just walk with the man and you'll be fine. Just walk with a man to your car. You're taking away her agency and telling her that she needs to walk with a man in order not to be assaulted. Or when people have to say, I have a boyfriend, to get someone to leave them alone, you're telling a woman that it doesn't matter that you're not interested. You need a man to, again, back you up. So that's the problem with programming that's being created that's very victim-centered, right? Like, go to self-defense. This whole pepper spray, right? Like, how many men, I went to this very important and interesting conference where it was the White Ribbon Campaign, and they said, put your hand up if you do something when you walk late at night, to protect yourself. And every woman put up their hand. They're like, I hold my keys in my hand. I have pepper spray. I pretend I'm talking to someone on the phone. Then they said, all the men in the room, please put your hands up if what you do when you're walking late at night. And nobody put their hand up, right? And it's about trying to centralize violence against women on the men that commit this, right? It's not about the women. It's teaching your sons not to rape rather than telling your daughters how to dress when they leave.
So that's very important that you kind of took the policy, and sometimes policies get created, but there's a long gap between the policy and the implementation. So the program protocols and stuff like that needs to be changed as well. And there has to be investment as well, right? Investment of resources into making that happen. In high school setting and elementary school setting, let's talk a bit about the attitudes of young men, or the implication of certain quote-unquote cultural norms on women as well.
Since Bill 157, the Safe School policies, the high school and elementary schools are able to act on these attitudes of the patriarchy. It's like, and these attitudes are also coming into the classroom as well as outside and in the fields. And what we are seeing is that, again, social media does play a huge role in it, because it does portray boys or youth or TV shows as degrassi to anything out there. It shows that to be a teenage boy, this is how you have to be, and then they bring that into the classroom, and then we see that the girls are also, they're seeing the same TV shows, they're talking the same language, they're seeing the videos, the music videos, the pop music videos, and when they bring that into the classroom, sometimes it turns into a criminal offense. Something as simple as doing this, and the girl feels that's not something she wanted at that time. Even it could be a friend or a best friend, that falls under Bill 157's assault. I think for the perpetrator, for him, it's fixed in his mind that, hey, I just did that, and she's my friend, and I can do that because that's what happens on TV. I'm not stalking her because that's what happens on movies. That's how I win affection. And Maroon 5's latest music video is about I'm an animal, like I'm just, it's literally stalking a woman. He's standing outside a woman's window and saying, I'm looking at you as an animal, and I'm going to stalk you as an animal. And these are the videos that the kids are listening to. So we are finding that this is when we have to involve the police, because Bill 157 is not just physical violence, it's verbal, it's sexting, it's texting, right? And when the police are involved, we also bring in mental health workers, we bring in crisis counselors, we bring in heritage-based workers from such as family services or Yellow Brick House. So we are trying to, like you said, we are not just working with the victims, we are trying to facilitate the information with our perpetrators as well, because these are the young men that are going to be men one day, right? But I think we're also finding a challenge with the transgender students as well, where the violence is even much more fierce for our transgender youth, especially transgender youth that are transitioning into women again, right? So even in that pocket, it's the transgender women that are being assaulted, right? So I know it's we need the support of the whole community, but we also need a lot, like you said, it's the perpetrators, or it's the young men that we need to work a lot more from a younger age onwards, because a person said, oh, when Vijay hits people, everybody claps. What did I do wrong? I just had a fight, and because I was speaking up for my girl, why am I being suspended? Right? So I think that mentality needs to change.
Both critical media skills as well as understanding what harassment is, right? It's not up to you to decide. It's the person who is being harassed, whether they felt unwelcome or uncomfortable with that. So talking a bit more about healthy relationships and from a woman's perspective, what's happening with respect to reaching out to young women to kind of have them engaged in more assertive roles, like in terms of resisting or reporting, or I know it's bleak with the support system, but within the context of women empowerment work, is there things happening?
I think that one of the most significant things are kind of collectives that have started. I know at some of the schools, I won't name any schools, but they've got equity councils starting, right? And Initha touched on something, I think the idea of culture and online texting, right? And the media, right? Now, I want to put in a disclaimer, Neethan, to say that doesn't mean that we don't let our kids watch TV. That doesn't mean that we take away the phones, don't sit on the computer,
Let's
right?
start with parents modeling a behavior before we take off the
exactly, right? And I think that when it comes to, I really wanted to touch on the culture bit, because I think culture and how we socialize young people and young men particularly is very much connected to the way that it translates itself within our schools, right? And so you have things like, I was at one of my schools, and all the young men on the football team, which is often seen as a very kind of macho, misogynistic space, were giving out white ribbon campaigns talking about it, right? But it still upholds this idea of like, it is not about talking about the behaviors, right? The behaviors of objectifying women's bodies, right? And particularly like, I think that we can come up with so many examples in mainstream white culture or Western media, but something that I had to have a conversation with about, I think 2 weeks ago with a group of my young men within the Tamil community was the movie with the Vikram. Right? It's a great example of how women's bodies, predominantly, Amy Jackson, who is a white woman, is brought into Indian cinema to portray the the epitome of beauty, which is a white woman. All of these racialized women, regardless of how light their skin may be, that are often imported into South Indian cinema.
Went to Bollywood first, and now it's to Hollywood.
Now we're going to Hollywood, because it's like, this is what the market, who are men, want. Who says that's the case? And then you have her body is constantly, because she is a white woman, and these respectability politics, and to put it like that, Tamil women cannot portray themselves in a particular way, cannot expose themselves, because that is seen as degrading. So we are going to use this opportunity to put Amy Jackson in a bikini. Right? These are particular ways in which men choose to portray women, right? And then on top of that, she is put on a whole bunch of ads, right? She's turned into cellular phones, she's turned into a motorbike at one point, right? And I think that we have to be critical of this, right? Because otherwise we're not going to be able to change the culture of it, right? And we're not going to be able to change the culture of violence, because this is also violence on women's bodies, right?
Yes, definitely.
So I think that kind of connects to the work, and I think more and more of that, though, is coming from really radical spaces outside of the community, right? It's coming from, programs like Lost Lyrics, right? We can speak to, Brown Canada work that CASA is doing. The list is going on, but it's not happening within the schools, because the schools are such a controlled space, and to be able to even get space in the schools is limited because, classes, we don't have space for it, and it's limited to the social worker, right? But to even get access to the space means that we have to run programming outside. And then we have the politics of it, where more and more money, even though provincially we're having this great rollout of, this project, which has its weaknesses, of course, but federally, what's happening, right? We're talking about,
cuts to programs,
Planned Parenthood, safe abortions, right? Shelters being cut back left, right, and center. So we live within a real, I think, a hypocrisy, and I think that we need to deal with that.
Solutions are being thrown here and there just to attract attention, but not systemic. And that conversation about objectifying or sexualizing or like not respecting the woman in general, particularly even young boys growing up, young men in high schools as well, is a problematic thing that needs to be addressed head on. But before we take a break, I want to talk a bit about victim blaming that is prevalent in every culture, but since it's a Tamil community related show, let's talk a bit about what's happening. And I put an article about this alleged Jian Gomeshi's issue, and one woman came out and said, she had gone to drink at his place and got assaulted. And one of the prominent, everybody comments on Facebook and stuff, right? But I saw one of our prominent community, quote unquote, leader say the moral of the story is don't go to a man's house, let alone drink at that house, right?
Sounds like the cop at York.
Yeah. So this is the guy who is actually occupying a particular space in our community, right?
Interesting.
So it is something that needs to be addressed as well. So how do we deal with it, and what's your sense of victim blaming?
I think it's very annoying when men comment on how to prevent sexual violence, when some men do face it, but you don't face it every day of your life. And I think with victim blaming, that's the reason why sexual violence is the most underreported crime. Like, we have all these stats, but if you can only imagine all the people that aren't coming forward and sharing what is happening because of the victim blaming, right? Everyone that is sexually assaulted blames themselves. It's a side effect of it. And if you want to actually come forward with this, you're going to be questioned by your parents, especially in the Tamil community, of why were you with a boy? What were you doing with that boy? Were you drinking? What were you wearing? This is why I tell you not to go out late at night. Why don't you just study at home, right? This is just within our own community. Not even mentioning what we're supposed to consider Canada the promised land of justice, right? When a police officer is asking you those same questions your parents are asking you, why would you report, right? And it's like, it's come to the point where there's some people that don't even think that they could rape their own wife. That it doesn't exist, right? And like, when you learn these things, you're kind of shocked, but like, something that I pointed out is, if you ask any woman where there's a moment in her life where she has been scared and it has changed her, you will find every woman in the room that says that, or you'll find a woman that knows somebody else that it has happened to. And this is just an issue that's prevalent amongst all women and more towards racialized women.
So we haven't really done justice to this topic in this segment. It's scratching the surface, but somehow we had to bring the conversation to a certain level to have this continue. So we're going to take a quick commercial break for a few minutes and then come back and talk a bit about civic leadership and opportunities for women to have leadership positions within our community. So let's take a few minutes break and join us back in a few minutes. Welcome back. You're watching Crossroads with Neethan Shan. We're talking about issues and challenges faced by young women in school system, both the public school system as well as in the post-secondary education realms. We had talked a bit about the educational system and the inequities that exist there. We talked a bit about violence against women in different contexts. For us to have meaningful change, the leadership has to change and be reflective of the gender diversity that we have. It doesn't need a woman to champion a woman's cause, but at the same time, if the woman is there, it's going to be more useful, responsive, because the person would understand the challenges, right? Like, so the premier comes out and says, I'm a woman and I understand these challenges. Here is a program, to look at gender-based violence or violence against women. It makes a lot of meaning, a lot of connections, and a lot of authenticity. Plus, it's relevant. It's not somebody else deciding for a particular population that's affected. So let's talk a bit about opportunities for leadership within our own communities. All of you have had roles within our organizations and also external to Tamil community as well, right? How do we? I'm not going to ask you if we are there yet, because we all know that how behind we are. But what are the issues when you're trying to come into a leadership position? Can I start with Jessica, and what do we face here, and what needs to change?
I think being a woman and trying to get involved with a leadership position, you face double the criticism that anyone would face, right? It's always about, if you're talking about women's issues, why aren't you talking about these issues? These are the real issues that are important, but what they don't understand is being a woman and being there is an issue itself for most people. So when you're trying to be an activist, it's, well, she's too angry, or she's too emotional. And of course I'm angry, of course I'm emotional, because I've had to pass all these barriers to get involved, right? For a man to be involved in a Tamil community is recognized, and it's like, my son does this, my son does that. I was lucky, like my father is open to this. My mother is a very independent woman. So for me to get involved, it was like, that's just how she is. We can't stop her. She'll get involved, she'll do whatever she wants. But when my parents go to other people's houses, she's very mouthy girl, like, how is she going to get married? Is her in-laws going to be able to take her mouthiness, right? And it's like, why does everything I do have to relate back to marriage, or relate back to how I'm going to get a job because I'm a mouthy woman, or can I keep a job because I'm not going to put up with anything that tells me that I am different from a man or segregates me? So these are issues that I think, like, I as a student and as a woman has faced, where people don't take us seriously. And if they do take us seriously, it's always, she's too angry, we need to just work around how we talk to her because she gets too sensitive about certain issues.
Are the spaces being created for women being created by men for a particular purpose in our communities? Or is it independent spaces, right? And what's your experience been?
Yeah, I think it stems off of what Jessica was talking about, right? Where when spaces are created, they're very particular spaces. You're there to play a particular role. And I think the directive is given in terms of what the agenda is. The decision, whether we like it or not, is already made behind doors before it can even have access to any sort of mobilization. So even if you're going to contribute something, there is already a system in place in the room where you're a minority. You're either going to choose one camp of men as opposed to another camp of men, and then you follow suit, right? In a place where women are out of the blue given an opportunity to be able to organize, you really find out that at the end of the day, the directive is really coming from somewhere, and things are said and a directive is provided to particular people, and that is how it unfolds. When you push back, you're automatically kind of demonized, and you have to really justify yourself. You have to almost fight to prove that what you're saying is coming from a genuine place, and that you actually mean well-being for the organization, right? And that's a really, really difficult place. And oftentimes it's just like when, I mean, right now I do have a partner, right? Before being married, that was just very much the same thing. It's like, it's about time you settle down. You're really mouthy. Why do you need to, my mom would often say, as much as she's independent, like, just be conscious of who you're speaking to and what the audience is, right? And I said that, I have to be quite honest, and our family is obviously used to it, and they've created an environment, right? But I think this also connects, Neethan, to kind of gendered identities of the queer community. I think we have to talk about it, because as much as families do support their children because they understand who they are, that the community and the way that we talk about it in public spaces is still controlled.
Yeah.
Right? Time and time again, I've been told, like, why don't you wear a sari, right? Like, this is, you're coming to an event, you should wear a sari, you should wear a Punjabi suit, right?
Yeah. Cultural restrictions apply only to women in many of these events, right?
I'm like, no, I'm going to wear pants and a shirt and I'll be fine, right? It's like, no, this is what needs to happen, right? And you're put there as kind of to satisfy the status quo because they need somebody to fill that position, right? But then when it comes down to real decision-making power, very few opportunities are provided. And I think that we need to be able to, the leadership needs to be able to change that. Or the ultimate, I think, is that women need to come together and start supporting each other. Because in this, what's also plays is class plays out, right? Caste plays out, right? And ageism plays out. Right, of what a young women grown up, raised in, Western countries, the blood boils a bit quicker, right? And they just need a bit more experience. They don't have enough experience, right? Whereas our male counterparts will be given plenty of opportunities to be able to prove themselves, and we're a second resort, right? So it just comes down to either being silenced, right? Being slowly, saying, oh, she's married now, she's got, and that's often happened to me, right? I can be very honest. She's married now, Darshika's got to settle down, right? And it's like, that's not the case. I'm actually really active in various other groups that may not see eye to eye, but I still keep my principle in the politics that I come from, and I'm able to engage in a radical discussion of identities, right? So it's the nature of it. It's unfortunate. And I just hope that we can really create opportunities for women in the future.
Do we say to our organizations, in 2 years, can you make 50% of your board of directors to be women? And have a selection process that is transparent, so women with various backgrounds would apply? Or how do we, like, I go to political meetings, it's predominantly men, right? And sometimes it's some women, but they're also connected to a man in some ways. Like, we've had women leaders in South Asia, but they were always brought in somehow through a man's connection and stuff like, which is not I'm not saying that's completely a bad thing, because you use your agencies and networks to get spaces, right? But how do we make spaces for people who are coming out of nowhere, not having direct network, to be able to access leadership, right? Somehow, some sort of a challenge has to be made to the community.
But it's also connected to family structures and the way we perceive society, right? Because if women are going to be on the forefront of making change, then who is tending to the home? Who is caring for children, right? These are particular nuclear family structures that we still uphold, right? And even guilt that's passed on,
Why is childcare a woman's issue?
And that's exactly it. Why is it a women's issue, right? Why is it that, even if, you were saying, right? I think that even if we had an organization with 50% board, that's only a representative number. The real decisions, because it depends on who on that board is able to bring opportunities and who is able to access money and who is able to access power, right? Unless she is aggressive or seen as being vocal, she will not have the ability to be able to make that change or put in that position. But she's put in that position for a particular reason by a particular group of people. And that system still maintains, because we have to look at who controls capital, right? At least in this day and age, right? Who really controls capital? And then that discussion continues.
Though it's symbolic, we go to events and most of the time the registration desk is women, right? Or the people who are giving flowers are women, right? Even if it's related to our struggles, which had actually empowered a lot of women to be engaged in the liberation movement and so on. Even things that are related to it. We see a complete division of labor based on gender norms. Who challenges this? Is that your experience as well? Or?
It is very much so, and I believe when the challenges come, the label of an angry, loud woman is there, which also marginalizes that person from society or from the community, which puts in a barrier for them to continue on with their work. And when we talked about saris, why aren't the men wearing vertis on those special days? On those days we are remembering our people that we have lost. Or why are our leaders, young women are used as tokenism to do a speech written by a man or a group of men? And then if we have 50-50 on a board, why are the 50% of the men running the whole board and running the 50% of the women? And my question is, when a woman leader is kind of molded, who's molding that woman leader, and why are you molding that group? Who are those group of men that are molding that woman leader? And what happens when she turns around and says, I'm going to kind of start to ask my own questions, and what happens to that woman, and what happens to her from there onwards and her growth? I think it's the challenge that I find is when I speak up or when I use those social justice words, I'm automatically labeled as, oh, there she goes, that angry woman, there she goes, that we better not involve her anymore. So who are those people that are saying we better not involve? I think that group of people need to change, because then any woman identified person can come out and say, no, this is wrong, like I don't agree with this, and this is how we should look at different options. Because
maybe we need a focal point from which this advocacy takes place, right?
Exactly.
A completely independent woman-led organization that is from externally able to hold some of our structures accountable for what they say they are, right? In terms of being inclusive.
I'm just
with a growth mindset too, and with sometimes those organizations are already embedded in gender based roles. They're so fixed on that gender based roles that they're using that organization to enforce more and more of that gender-based roles. Right?
But I also think that it also connects to my fear with that is that it becomes, well, you're going to take care of International Women's Day, right? Or you're going to take care of December 6th Memorial. You're going to talk about sexual assaults, right? Or you're going to talk about women's issues of child caring and healthcare and childcare. That's it.
And ushering
people and registration and all of these, meaning, this is a great outsource. I bet you any money that we will get contacted for, like, do you provide administrative services? Do you provide ushering?
Do you provide hospitality?
But the reason I was asking is there are a lot of women like you in our communities who have not found that space.
Totally.
And is there a possibility of that group of people coming together? Because, I mean, feminist approach is actually beneficial to everybody, including the men, economically, socially, culturally, you name it, right? Politically.
It means acknowledging all oppression.
Acknowledge all oppressions, right? And I think that strength can generate from somewhere an organized structure that can come from it. I mean, I'm shouldn't be proposing solutions, it should come from there, but I'm just thinking there should be some sort of a point of focus that can direct our community in the right direction. Right now, that seems to be a big void. I think so.
But I think that it's also the responsibility of all the organizations to engage in some sort of a policy internally, right? If we were to have some sort of a forum, right, for example, that where all of these organizations signed on as a commitment to say that these are the commitments, that outcomes and resolutions passed at this forum where women made decisions, or this is how we're going to move forward. We need to see a commitment from that. Us having an organization independent of that, building all of these things. I mean, I don't think we need another organization to do that work, it needs to happen across the board, right? But people need to have a commitment to say, this is an issue. We want to be able to be, pioneers and trailblazers when it comes to a new way of understanding gender equity and eliminating this issue, right?
And I think even a start is when we are supposed to plan those International Women's Days, or when we are supposed to tackle on the issue of sexual violence or any other form of violence that women have to deal with, it's asking, how can we help you? Rather than directing the conversation or saying, let's just keep this as a 1 month issue. It's asking, what can we do to provide this for you, to make this better and to bring in more people?
That's a good point. We can finish with that actually. What are the good characteristics of a good ally?
An ally checks their ally card every day. They know that just because one day they were helping someone out, the next day you ask what the community wants. You don't dictate what the community does. It's not just International Women's Day that women take care of. It's also, what else do women want? Why can't women's history be for every day? Right? Like, women face oppression every day. Women make less every day. So why can't we be talking about women every day? Why is it about men every day? Why do we call these fancy politicians to speak? Why do we call these huge men that have written these books? Why don't we call people in our own community to talk about their experiences, especially women in our community? And I mean, I listen to my grandmother for hours, right? She's born in 1926. She has stories, she has experiences, and that's how I learn, right? My role models aren't people in history books. My role models are people that sit beside me that do this work every day.
Great. So thank you very much for taking the time. We have only scratched the top layer of the issue. We only talked about educational system most of the time. The workplace related stuff is a whole big area. Seniors related issue is another big area in terms of how women's rights are protected or tampered on. So we will definitely continue this conversation through CrossRoads at a certain point. But thank you very much, Jessica, Initha, and Darshika, for taking the time to join us and make sure that these voices are heard through our TV station to our general audience, to make sure that International Women's Day does not become a celebration of women without having a deeper conversation about some of the inequities that exist. So thank you very much, and thanks viewers for joining in. We had a deep conversation about gender equity and education. We will join you next week with another topic. Thank you and stay tuned.